We need to talk about the breakthrough objectives on Battlefield 2042. I want to start this by saying that you could probably also talk about whether breakthrough is even the right game mode for the new all-out warfare gameplay we have. 128 players fighting for the same one or two objectives, things tend to get crowded and chaotic. However, I have to admit that even I, who already preferred 32-player Rush over 64-player Conquest in past Battlefields, actually quite enjoy playing it, especially when using a sniper rifle. But there are three maps that kind of dampen the fun a little bit: Orbital, Hourglass, and Kaleidoscope. And what do those three maps have in common? They have objectives on top of a tower. Something that just doesn't go hand in hand with 128 players. In this video, we're gonna talk about all three maps individually. We're gonna look at why the tower objective is a problem and see if we can find solutions for how that could be fixed in the future. Maybe even by moving the whole objective to a new location. There are two main issues that make these maps almost unplayable from an attacker's point of view: the amount of access points to the roof and the fact that the new call-in feature allows players to call in any vehicle on top of a tower. There's simply no way to take a tower objective if you're greeted by a hovercraft or an M5C every time the elevator doors open. The amount of access points is probably a bit harder to fix, so the first change I would personally like to see is that players are no longer able to call in vehicles on top of a tower. This change alone would make life a lot easier for the attackers. It's still gonna be incredibly hard to take the objective because of the limited amount of access points and the player count, but I think it would be worth trying before changing the location of the objectives entirely. Let's take a look at Orbital first, the map that I personally think would profit the most from prohibiting vehicle call-ins when standing in a building. Please note that we're not gonna look at any of the other objectives on the map. We're only gonna focus on the objectives on top of the towers of each map respectively. Orbital has a total of 6 access points to the main roof, the most of the 3 maps we're looking at today. Technically, but we'll get to that later. There are 2 staircases inside the building and a total of 4 ropes on the outside of the building. Noteworthy here is that the staircases start on a separate floor just underneath the roof of the building, which creates the first problem. That floor itself is only accessible via 4 elevators or 2 ropes on the inside. If the defenders control the entire floor, just getting access to the staircases is not an easy task. And when the attackers finally have control of the staircases, the grenade spam ensues, which is the next problem. The whole area from the roof to the floor via staircase is very open, which makes throwing C5, incendiaries or grenades from the top very easy and effective. You can hardly run up to the roof without taking damage, and if you manage to do so, you're greeted by vehicles and a horde of players on 2 separate levels. The only counter to this is to spam smoke grenades, run through it and pray. I have never actually seen this work though. The only other way up is the ropes on the outside of the building. The problem there is that you have no cover at all once you reach the top. However, in roughly 20 games on that tower objective, I have lost one single game as a defender, and it was because about 15 to 20 enemy players came up the same rope, one after another. We ran out of ammo and got overwhelmed. By the time our players guarding the stairs realized what's happening, it was already too late. Ever since that game, I've been trying to replicate that strategy as an attacker, but try and organize a push with 20 players when your only means of communication is the all chat. I've never managed to get more than 5 on board so far, and thus I've never won Orbital as an attacker. Yet. A good option would be to clear the roof with an attack helicopter, but with 30, 40 or more people sitting on top, you're bound to get locked on pretty early. Another thing I've tried is sitting on the hill with a tank, shooting at the rope exits while some of my squad mates make their way up. But it's nearly impossible to clear the area because of the distance and the angles you're getting. Here are some changes I would like to see on Orbital. As you can see, one side of the building has some kind of covered hallway. I would like to see something similar implemented on the other sides, so that when you get up the staircase or the ropes, you can't be shot at from two separate levels. Not as closed and claustrophobic as the one that already exists, of course. Just something that limits the amount of angles the defenders have on incoming attackers. Maybe some sun sails, for example? You know, the ones that give you some shade and cover you from the sun? There could be small gaps for the defenders to see through, and you could shoot through them as well. But it would certainly make life a bit harder for the defenders sitting on the top level. Another possible thing would be to extend a wall from the ceiling to the floor, in between the staircases leading up to the roof, as illustrated here. This would give attackers at least some form of protection from incoming grenade spam in this area. Unfortunately, I couldn't quite get the perspective right in my mock-up. There would be options to move the objective entirely if needed. For example, it could be moved to either one of the buildings seen in this area, where the D sector lies in Conquest. Next up, we're gonna take a look at Hourglass and Kaleidoscope. The two maps follow the same principle. There are two towers that are connected, so you can either get up on the tower with the objective, or you can go up the second tower and zip line to the other. So in theory, both maps have a total of 8 access points to the objective. But in reality, it's more like 4 plus 4 because of the two separate towers. The main issue here is that all of the access points are either elevators or zip lines. The problem with elevators is that as an attacker, you're a sitting duck because as a defender, you have all kinds of possibilities to eliminate everyone in that elevator as soon as the doors open. You have vehicles, C5, rocket launchers, grenades, spray your gun into it, you name it. There is absolutely nothing that you can do as an attacker to counter it except praying the defenders are sleeping the moment you get up. One small change I would like to see here is to remove the displays that show on which floor the elevator is right now. The way it is, defenders know exactly when another elevator is on its way and they can prepare accordingly. If they didn't know, there's always a chance you can catch them napping. Looking at Hourglass, I have actually won a game as an attacker and lost a game as a defender one time each. In about a dozen times getting to the last sector. I've also seen the tower taken 2 more times, but the attackers couldn't get the second objective capped. This is because Hourglass offers at least a little bit of cover and protection when exiting the elevators. It's not as easy for the defenders to sit there and spam explosives. Once you can no longer call in vehicles on top of the tower, I don't think Hourglass needs major changes to make it a bit more balanced. One thing I would like to see, however, and imagine would work quite well, is if the backside of the tower had 2 ropes. And maybe a little more cover in the area shown on screen. Another idea would be to make the railings in front of the elevators indestructible, so you can't shoot at the incoming attackers from the level below. You can also see there are 2 separate elevators a little further back, but they're currently not usable as there's nothing there on the ground floor. Them being usable would also help, as the more access points the attackers have, the higher the chance the defenders get caught off guard when you make your move. Last but not least, we're gonna take a look at Kaleidoscope. As I've mentioned before, Kaleidoscope follows the same principle as Hourglass with its 2 towers. The big difference here is that there's 0 cover once you get out of the elevator, and there's no decent second objective that takes away some of the attention. I don't think there's much to fix here, to be honest. We're basically cramming a bunch of soldiers into an elevator and sending them up the meat grinder. I have never seen the attacking team win on Kaleidoscope. Granted, I've only got there about 10 times, since it's hard enough to get there in the first place. One thing I've tried is to spawn in a helicopter as Sundance and C5 bomb them on a flyover, but it's just not effective enough if their whole team sits there, especially when vehicles are involved. Another tactic we've tried is to hide behind one of Irish's deployable covers and to throw C5 over it to clear the immediate area. But in reality, most of the time you get blown to pieces before you can even throw the C5. I think the only way to fix Kaleidoscope is to move the objective entirely. We have this great area right next to the towers where the E objectives are in Conquest. With the second objective remaining on the bottom floor of the tower where it is right now, this could work quite well in my opinion. Of course, there are other options to fix these maps, but they are not quick fixes. One thing I know every Battlefield fan would love to see is if we could slowly destroy the towers with explosives, ultimately leading to them collapsing, making it easier to capture the objective. We already had this option in Siege of Shanghai in Battlefield 4, but I'm not even sure if this is something that could be implemented at this stage of the game anymore. Let me know what you think about the current state of the objectives on Breakthrough, as well as my proposed changes in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Every little bit helps and is greatly appreciated. Have a nice day and see you in the next video.